All right, looks like we have not climbed up anymore, and looks like we're just coming up on that minute. So I just want to go ahead and welcome everybody. So we're going to be talking today, excuse me, when I get my voice back properly. We're going to go ahead and talk today about two different things. Primarily, we're going to be talking about mitigating threats to the space security. We have two individuals that are going to be partaking tonight. David Swafford, who's Supervisory Aerospace Engineer at the U.S. Department of Defense. Had to make sure I had that title exactly right. And we have Samson Arawali, who is a doctoral student of DGS, Doctorate of Global Studies, here at American Public University. So we are going to start with Mr. Swafford. So David, it is up, you are up.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Let me go ahead and pull my slides up, and can you hear me?
No.
Now you can hear me. Okay, got it. Thank you, Samson. I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides here and get started like that. As Dr. Cooper said, my name is David Swafford. I'm a doctoral student also in strategic intelligence at the American Military University. And I'm also work for you, if you're an American taxpayer. I work in your Department of Defense, tracking foreign threats to the national security space architecture. I lead a team of distinguished experts that do that. They do the lion's share of the work. I just kind of herd the cats now that I'm more of a senior fellow there. But I've also been a red team leader in Schriever and multiple other United States government war games. And we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. I want to talk briefly about red teaming as a tool for solving some of our complex space security issues. And hopefully we'll have some good discussion and questions at the end after Samson gets through with his presentation as well. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Can you still see my slides?
I think that was the end.
Let me go ahead and go back and redo that, start it up again.
It would not be a meeting if we didn't have technical issues.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Whoa. There we go. No, that's, yeah, let's try this again. All right, let's go to the next slide. It's taking a minute to load. That's what's happening, I think. It lets me go all the way to the end slide. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and do it like this off to the side because...
David, can you click on number 1 and then hit the display, the preset?
Yeah. And then hit the slideshow. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, that's where I was a moment ago.
There you are. You're on the first slide now.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, it wouldn't be a presentation online without technical difficulties for sure. So stepping into slide 2. So why do we need red teaming? What's the big deal with that? Well, to the right there, you see a small sample of headlines that have been covering some of the foreign counter-space missile tests over the past 15 years or so. These are just missile tests, but these seem to be the ones that get a lot of the headlines and attention. You see the one about the 2007 Chinese ASAT missile test there. That was the first one that really destroyed a satellite in orbit, got everybody's attention. And you see the discussion in the newspaper about the Russian ASAT missile test, and then India got into the game a couple of years ago and surprised everybody with shooting down one of their own satellites. The problem is much more complex, though, than just missiles. The Defense Intelligence Agency, if you're interested, puts out a very good overview of space security threats every year. It's called Challenges to Security in Space, and it goes into much greater detail about many of these threats. I really encourage you to go to their page and look it up. It's free online there. But so the problem is complex, it's evolving, it's developing, it's becoming more serious with every passing year. Experts started looking into this, started paying attention really in the 1990s when the Rumsfeld Commission, which was commissioned by Congress to address the ballistic missile threat to the United States. In January through July of that year, they did a study, and part of that, one of the findings that they came up with was that we are very reliant upon space to the point where a space Pearl Harbor could cripple our warfighting capability due to increasing reliance on it. We use space for a variety of purposes to project military power abroad, and without it, we would be severely hindered in our ability to collect intelligence and communicate, coordinate forces with ourselves and our allies. So the rapid proliferation of these threats and increased is just increasing the demand for a coalition approach to solving this problem. We're not likely to fight a future war alone. Our allies are becoming more and more reliant upon space as well for intelligence and force projection. We're closely cooperating in a lot of areas like operations and intelligence sharing, but what is missing is in many cases is that melding of the minds and the rich, deep thinking on a regular systematic basis about adversary space strategy, doctrine, intentions, and capabilities, and future technical developments. Now, this is where red teaming can bolster our current intelligence sharing and analysis on these threats. Just for a moment, let's pause and define what our terms are. A red team is a group of individuals that plays the role of an enemy or competitor to provide security feedback from that perspective. So basically, you're trying to get into the mind of your adversary and see what he's thinking and see where he's going and see what he's going to do, what weapons he's going to develop, how he's going to use them. They're ideally composed of subject matter experts on the country or the group or the issue being studied. It's applicable to many fields. Recently, heavily applicable to cybersecurity. I found a lot of literature about airport security from law enforcement and military and intelligence agencies. They're all applying red teams in one way or other, or at least if they're not, they're exploring how to do that. So we're going to look at how the application of red teaming to U.S. and allied space security cooperation is a logical progression and next step in our cooperation in space security. So on slide 3 here, it's just kind of representative of the fact that there's no shortage of literature on red teaming. Its profile as a problem-solving technique is rising, not only in the military and government circles, but in business as well. There is even a book out there called Red Team that's I've got. It's really good. It's from the corporate perspective and has a lot of good insights on that as well. But what you're looking at here is these 2 books here. They're just representative samples of what we looked at when we did this study, and it just kind of makes it these 2 books are from the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. I looked at other DoD articles like the role and the status of DoD red teaming and national security strategy and academics and all. But these 2, what I would call like almost like the red team Bible. They have a lot of information on how to do red teaming, what it is, and basically how to do it, how to incorporate it into your planning and everything. But it's not clearly indicated in many of the writings as a prescription, as I say here, for coalition assessments of common threats, including space. The literature it talks about an era of persistent conflict, and it does allude to using red teaming and using allied perspectives and points of views, but it doesn't really lay it out and how to do that in a coalition context or the imminent need for that. Some agencies do recognize the need for incorporating it into their training, creating a red teaming culture for their organization. Homeland Security, I think, had one of their employees did a paper on that I found online. It was very good, and it talked about how Homeland Security is looking at implementing red teaming, especially in things like airport security and counterterrorism. But there's on a coalition level, there's just not like the literature seems to be lacking in its treatment, and that's where we see a gap in the literature and the need for doing red teaming at the coalition level, especially for space, as we will see in shortly. So on slide 4 here, it's probably kind of a busy slide, but it just talks about the need to establish a red space team, what I'm calling a fusion center here. Really, the United States really needs to lead this effort because we bring a lot to the table in terms of space assets that we and our allies rely upon. And we have been the driver for a lot of our coalition space policy and operations. We have some examples in the real world about the United States and its allies coming together on an operational level. We talk about the U.S. Air Force Space Command, the example of the Combined Space Operations Center at Vandenberg Air Force Base. It should be Space Force Base there. At the time when I was reading the article about it, Space Force, Air Force, sorry. But this is a U.S.-led multinational space operations center. It provides command and control of space forces for the United States Space Command's Combined Force Space Component Command. And the CSPOC is located at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Its mission is to execute operational command and control of space forces, obviously. And the goodness that comes from this is an example of space cooperation at the coalition level. And one of its elements is the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Division. This element provides space intelligence to the other CSPOC elements. And the focus here is current operational intelligence that informs of real-time threats to allied space activities. And although intelligence support to current operations is extremely vital, we need to have a current threat picture if we're going to be able to operate effectively and safely and achieve what the Space Force calls space dominance. However, what we're talking about here is the need for long-range strategic forecasting of adversary space strategy intentions that is beyond the scope of elements like CSPOC's ISRD. The establishment of a coalition red team that takes on the task of near and long-term forecasting of adversary space threats is the end state we're talking about here. The foundations of such we don't want to create something if we don't have to right out of thin air. We do have some foundational elements that we could stand up, the kind of space intelligence fusion center that I'm talking about. Ideally, we would use an existing structure like NATO's Intelligence Fusion Center, or the recently established NATO Space Center, which has more an operational focus, but which, like CSPOC, could integrate an intelligence cell in which the red team would reside. These elements that I'm talking about here, they have experts right now. I think the Space Center has elements from experts from the United States, Great Britain, Spain, the Netherlands, and Germany, likely to expand because NATO, 2 years ago when they stood this element up, they called space out as the fifth domain of combat that is requiring more and more of our attention, and obviously the need for the stand-up of the Space Center to handle operational capabilities in that regard. So, and the way this would work, the Allied Space Center red team would be composed of these same regional type political military space experts from the US and allied intelligence communities and military operational communities. And you see that busy diagram on the right there I keep referring to, and that was taken from the NATO IFC page. I've added a depiction at the lower right of how a space team might fit into this construct. Really, the space red team would be just like that fusion circle you see up there. You see subject matter expertise on everything from space systems, military expertise, strategy, doctrine, language, culture, et cetera. And you bring allies together from all the different nations, and they take intelligence from all source information, kind of like you see up there, feeding into the little NATO SEAL, but they use it to build products that not only inform real-time decisions on defense against foreign threats, space threats, but long-range assessments, the what-ifs, thinking outside the box, applying the expertise in various coalitions, perspectives, and rich thinking about scenarios in which these things could unfold, and the path that our adversaries would take to threaten our freedom of action in space. The time really to do this is now. It's long past now, actually, if you ask me. But NATO standing up this space center makes it gives it an opportunity to step in and say, hey, why don't we start inculcating the red team culture into this right now, so that we can, as this organization grows, it will already be a part of what you're doing. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I looked into writing this paper. Hopefully it could maybe parlay it into a doctoral dissertation one day, maybe with some work. But anyway, we'll go on to the next slide here. Making it happen, it goes without saying that senior leadership buy-in is going to be needed to make this, to make an allied coalition red team happen. The challenge will be, for lack of a better term, selling the idea to this constellation of coalition partners. You see some of the emblems of some different, our allies are thinking about this as well. And many of them have started standing up space commands or space forces that are analogous to our Space Force. And they, you see that, including the NATO emblem there that we recently discussed just on the previous slide, but they're seeing the increased need for space security cooperation, and they're also seeing the utility of red teaming due to participation in space-related war games, as we'll see in the next slide. And they would not be adverse to the idea, but speaking in their defense somewhat, they have limited resources, and that's a common problem across the board. We have so many priorities and so many things that we need to put bodies and resources and money and time and talent against. And there are hindrances also, like information sharing, and there are also some cultural things that, you know, and I've encountered this too as I've dealt with foreign allies. They don't necessarily see the same way as we do in the realm of maybe information sharing and things of that nature. Some countries might have a knowledge is power type mentality. If I share my information with you, or if I open up to you like this, you'll have some kind of leverage. Those are just typical cultural barriers that need to be overcome. And the answer to this is identification of leaders from these allied nations who will advocate for the creation of a coalition space red team, and those who are in the position to influence their government, military, and intelligence establishments, whomever is necessary. Also, you know, the legislation, because there's going to be money, it's probably need to be money applied to it. It will require an approach, a systematic coalition approach. I mean, everybody gets together and talks about how it should be done and takes that back to their nations and brings to bear the expertise required to make it happen. And it goes beyond just the NATO. NATO, I use NATO because it already has a space and intelligence structure that we could plug into, but it's beyond NATO because NATO, we have allies in the East as well. We have Japan, we have South Korea, we have Australia, and we most certainly should not leave them out. We cannot leave them out because they have a skin in the game along with us. But the NATO structure is a good starting point, and we should, the concept must include all of these other allied nations as well that have their space and security stakeholders alongside of us. Now, this leads me to, this is near and dear to my heart because I've been heavily involved in the Shriever War Game series since 2006. A successful model about how a future allied space red team can work is found in the Shriever War Game series. It's it was the U.S. Air Force Space Command. Now it's the U.S. Space Force's premier flagship war game. It's designed to explore critical space issues to include investigating the military utility of new developmental systems, common solutions to challenges, advancing space support within all the other warfighting domains, including air, land, sea, and cyber, along with space. Typical time frame is 10 years into the future, and we use these games to gauge how U.S. and allied space doctrine, plans, and capabilities can be shaped going forward to meet the challenges of future combat in all these domains. The games currently integrate the policy, operations, military, and intelligence expertise of Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And a vital component of the Shriever War Games is the Red Team, which I've had the privilege of leading Red Teams in 2 Shriever War Games, and also in the National Reconnaissance Office's Thor's Hammer war game in the past. And the Red Team functions like a mini fusion center that we talked about just a minute ago. It brings together U.S. and allied partners. Sometimes some of the allies have more resources to share, more people they can send, some don't. That's just an artifact of where we are in the process right now. And but they apply their knowledge of adversary strategy, doctrine, intent, capabilities, culture, language, history, all of that to help us get inside the enemy's head and predict their courses of action. They also identify and exploit vulnerabilities that the U.S. and allied space operations have, so that lessons can be learned to mitigate these vulnerabilities, potentially saving resources and lives by avoiding taking the path that would lead to these vulnerabilities. So in other words, if we know something that if we're going down a path that we know that an adversary would be able to exploit right now, we can give ourselves a moment of pause by going into a war game, having a red team really game that out and say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't think down that path. Maybe we should do something else because this adversary knows about it. They are planning for it. They can mitigate it. And it might not be a good idea to pursue that. One of the things I want to give you an analogy of that, in one of the Retriever War games, the red team, our red team, so stressed. I've still got people mad at me for this, by the way. They so stressed the U.S. and Allied space operations that the general who was playing the U.S. combat commander in the game decreed that there would be a part 2 to this game. They typically last a couple of weeks, but it ended on a bad note in which we had exploited a vulnerability that we saw, the red team saw, and thinking like the enemy had placed assets in position to neutralize some key vital space assets for Blue. And he said, we can't end this with a cocked gun to our head. This has shown us that we really need to explore how to get around this. So we had a part 2 to that game, and we were able to, and the point is not the red team winning. The point is the red team helping the blue team to decide how they can win in the future. And that's the whole point. This is the type of goodness that we're looking for on a regular basis. The way it would work would be something like a coalition of the willing that meets regularly. We have in the government committees, for lack of a better term, that meet regularly, monthly, or some of them quarterly, and they bring U.S. and allied experts together physically or virtually to tackle key space and other security problems. And those would be identified by the intelligence community or operational community or the lead warfighters or policymakers. Say an allied or U.S. commander wants to know the viability of some foreign weapon system or something like that. He could toss that over to the red team and game that out. They could go and take all their knowledge and game that out and give him or her a report and assessment of what direction the adversary may take with that. A standing allied red team could apply that kind of rich thinking and capture it. And on a regular basis, it wouldn't have to, at first, it wouldn't have to meet. I mean, because we have limitations about how we can get together, and we're doing this virtually right now, which is a great, powerful tool. I think the pandemic, that's one of the things has driven out is the ability to meet like this and exchange ideas and do work. And we could really do that on coalition level on a regular basis. We just have to identify the people involved that need to be involved and get them signed on and have them regularly participate. And we would be able to also not only feed into long-term planning and operations questions, and intelligence questions from our military leaders or national leaders, but we also be able to feed into games like the Retriever War game. And it would save time and resources because instead of having to plan out a lot of this stuff, you could just come together and take what a coalition red team has already put together and said, hey, we would like to apply this to the game. It fits really well. I think it will drive out the kind of questions you're trying to answer. And that's another way it could, some goodness it would bring to the table. This picture on the right here was the last Retriever War game I was involved in. It's not the full picture, I had to crop it, but this was held at Maxwell Air Force Base down here in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was you see all these uniforms there. One of the things I like to see our foreign allies come in with their flags on their shoulder and get to know them and talk to them. And in one of these games, we were sitting there planning what we were going to do as a red team, and a foreign military intelligence officer came to me and he says, you know, what we're talking about is good, but we see this, our country sees this adversary from this perspective. And he just laid it out and we all listened. And it was like, you know, I never thought about that before. I never really thought about how a foreign country would see the threat from that adversary, because some of them are closer to these adversaries than we are. So if they do something or we do something in space, the response may be different for them than it is for us. So that's another way that the richness of this process could come into play. Well, in conclusion, we're saying a lot of the same things here, that advocacy of this from the leadership perspective is what it's going to take. It's going to take consistency. And And we already have some of this activity going on, like in the Streeter War Games and in these fusion centers I talked about. Ad astra per aspera is a statement that coming from the manned spaceflight world is very, hits home to me. That's a hard road leads to the stars. That's the plaque that's on the Apollo 1 launch pad in Florida, where the Apollo 1 crew lost their lives in their endeavor to get us to the moon, to beat the Soviets to the moon. So it's going to take a lot of hard work to make this happen. But we have some of the foundations already available. We have people that are willing to do. We have advocates that are well placed, and some not so well placed, like me, but who are enthusiastic and energetic about it and really want to see it work. And if effectively implemented, we could see a lot of goodness come out of this. It'll be worth the effort. And this is obligatory. We're going to go back to the moon slide. A hat tip to our upcoming Artemis 1 launch. It'll be our first step back to a manned exploration of the moon. And having grown up here in Huntsville, Alabama, and having worked on NASA side for a long time in manned spaceflight training operations, I'm very excited about this. But it also represents the next level of international competition in space in terms of scientific discovery, resource exploitation, prestige, and national security. Some of our adversaries are talking about the utility of placing space systems, some military, at the Lagrange points and super geo and beyond, and even on the moon, and determining how our adversaries, their calculus for developing deep space exploration, intelligence and military space systems is the kind of study to which Red Team is very highly useful. And we hope that our allies will agree and take the necessary steps along with us for the establishment of a permanent allied Red Team, the staff with the expertise necessary to tackle these problems. So that's all I have. Again, I'm David Swafford. My contact information is right there. I'm also an adjunct professor at National Intelligence University, and go look them up and see what they have to offer as well. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Cooper so that we can prepare for Samson. And I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, David. As I mentioned in the chat, we're going to go ahead and go over to Samson next. Mr. Arwally is going to go through his presentation, and at the conclusion of his presentation, we will open up for a brief, probably call it 15, 20 minutes question and answer session. So if anybody has any questions on Mr. Swafford's presentation, please go ahead and send those to us via chat or via the Q&A, and we will cover those at the conclusion of Mr. Arwally's presentation. Over to you, Samson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. As a matter of fact, it's always okay. I always tell people it's easier to just call me Samson. So that's fine. Yeah, first of all, again, thank you very much, Dr. Cooper, for the intro. And again, my name is Samson Arawale. I'm a doctoral student of global security at the American Public University Systems. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and the opportunity to present. The topic I'll be talking about today is about mitigating terrorism or counterterrorism across Africa, and specifically in Nigeria, adapting space technology. But first of all, before I proceed, I would like to make a case why that is very, very critical and vital at this point. I've listened to a couple of presenters in the morning, and I've listened to Dave. I just saw that there's a huge need for security in space. And you'll find out that, but specifically to African case, we found out that, yes, space technology continues to benefit the world, and it remains a forefront for acceleration of globalization. Can you guys see my screen by any chance? I don't think I am sharing my screen. No?
No, you're not yet sharing the presentation.
All right, cool. Let me see, right there. I thought about that for 1 second. Okay, good, that's easier. Let me go back here. So yeah, like I said, I wanted to make a case for why global security and a global collective effort towards terrorism is really critical now, right now, especially towards Africa. As you can see, space technology continues to benefit the world and is at the forefront of globalization. But specifically to counterterrorism, it continues to provide strategic and tactical advantages to different countries. Some of them David mentioned, and we see what happened to al-Zawahiri in Afghanistan very recently. That was a result of extreme close resolution, targeted satellite and drone. And so that was good. And again, satellite allows real-time surveillance and monitoring. But in everything, I'm sure Dave knows this more than I do, in every team, the weakest link determines the strength of that team. Right now, Africa is the weakest link of counterterrorism because right now, and I will go to that in a minute, and I will explain that in a minute here, this is the picture of the global spread of terrorism right there. And here, oh, no. Here is the detail here that shows that, the legend that shows that this is a country that has no data, and this is a country that has highest impact of terrorism. And if you come here, you find out that, oh, not too fast. I'm running too fast. And if you come here, I'm trying to expand it. If you come here right here, you see that that's Nigeria right there in the middle of Africa. That's Nigeria. And Nigeria has, according to this, Nigeria has one of the highest impact of terrorism right now. But the big picture is that if you look at Africa, there's a cluster. There's a cluster of terrorism right now. And that's a big challenge. That's a big challenge for the world, because if this global terrorist organization, they're beginning to spread their tentacles right now. If they get a foothold in any of the countries in Africa, they could easily use it as a launching pad. And that would not be surprising. So that's why it's very critical that developed countries need to share data with Africa to help them mitigate that terrorism right now. So I'm going to go straight to the history of terrorism in Africa and then go back to Nigeria. We know that, yes, Africa continues to confront security threat, or security threat continue to confront Africa. But there's a specific uptick in extreme violence in 2014. And this 2014 uptick coincided to when ISIL, Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, was defeated in Iraq, which means when they were defeated in Iraq, they simply relocate to Africa, which is the low-hanging fruit. And so if we come back to Nigeria right now, there are three principal actors right now that are really devastating that country in terms of terrorism. The first one is Boko Haram, which I listed there. And most people that are in the security field will probably know about them. Boko Haram, and they have splinter groups. One of them is Jazz, which is currently affiliated with Al-Qaeda. The other one is ISWAP, which is affiliated with ISIS. So you see that all these international terrorist organizations, they're beginning to spread across the continent of Africa. They are in Mali, they are in Niger, they are in DFR. So they are all over the place, like I showed in the first picture there. The second level of actors in Nigeria is the other farmer conflict. The others are nomadic cattle rearers. Historically, there's always been conflict between the others and the farmers, but climate change made the case worsen it. Now there's more desertification, especially in the up north, where the others are, and they have to come down south, come to the middle belt, and that increases the clashes. Incidentally, those others, they used to carry sticks to move to direct their cattle. They have replaced the sticks with AK-47 right now. So that tells the level of conflict that is happening there. The third aspect of the actors in Nigeria right now are the immigrant Fulanese. the Fulanis, they are now coming in droves from several parts of the continent. They were coming from Mali, they were coming from Niger, they were coming from Benin, and they were coming to Nigeria. And there's a political undertone to that, but that's what we see. Those are the physical facts that we see right now. And so those are the three actors that are essentially causing mayhem to that country in terms of terrorism right now. Now, before I go, I would like to go back, let's go here. Before I go into adapting the space technology into mitigating terrorism in Nigeria, I would like to talk about African capability, space capability first, and then talk about Nigerian space capability and talk about Nigerian space limits and see where the help can actually come from. As you can see, in terms of African space capability, according to Space Generation Advisory Council right now, the whole continent of Africa right now has a total of 41 satellites. I listened to Dr. Gary Deal earlier on. He says that Starlink alone has over 3,000 satellites. Yeah, granted, those are communication satellites, but they are, the whole continent has only 41 satellites, while just communication satellite has over 3,000. Most of these satellites in Africa, they are low orbit satellites, and they are under the auspices of what is called disaster monitoring constellation. This is just a observation constellation that delivers images around the world. They gather all the images from those satellites, and those satellites are individually owned by members of that consortium. Interestingly, Nigeria is one of the consortium of that DMC. But the focus of all the satellites, virtually all the satellites, is basically on training and education, civilian weather management, desertification and quality and land quality. None of them has the level of resolution and capability for the surveillance that we're talking about to be able to mitigate active terrorism. Luckily enough, one of the satellites, Nigerian Sat-1, actually provided the first satellite image of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. So that really showed how the levees were failing and how the city was extensively flooded. Now, this is just a picture. This is just a picture showing different countries in Africa and their satellite capability when it was created and things like that. And if you look at this picture right now, you see that Nigeria is ranking 4th behind Algeria, Egypt, and South Africa. Interestingly, none of these countries here, except for Egypt, none of this country is facing the level of terrorist attack that Nigeria is experiencing right now. And Nigerian, being as a member of DMC, as like I said, has launched several satellites. They have Nigerian Sat-1 that was launched in 2003 and Nigerian Sat-2 that was launched in 2011. Both of these satellites were created by the SSTL company in Europe as part of the DMC, and they were launched into orbit by Ukraine using Russian rockets. And in 2004, another satellite was launched by Nigeria, NICOMSAT-1, and this was built by China and launched into orbit by Chinese rockets. And that was the first communication satellite in Africa. Unfortunately, that satellite failed in 2007, and it was replaced by NICOMSAT-R in 2011. Interestingly, NigerSat-2, because of the resolution, and I'll go to that in a minute, NigerSat-2, because of its resolution, and NICOMSAT-1R, because it's a communication satellite. Both of them were not designed for military, but they were the two satellites that have been employed specifically for military operations. This is just a picture. This is just a picture of the Governing Council of Nigeria and picture of some engineers, Nigerian engineers that are working to develop the new Nigerian Sat-X at the SSTL facility in Europe. Now, let's talk about the limitations that Nigerians are experiencing in terms of satellite now. Now, there are three, even though there are more limitations, there are three limitations that I'm going to call out here. Like I said before, the first one is resolution. Nigeriansat-2, which is the one that has the highest resolution. The resolution of that satellite is 2.5 to 5 meters per pixel sizes. It's 2.5 to 5 meters. Whereas a resolution images of less than 50 centimeters is recommended for accurate surveillance. So that tells you right there that Nigeria is way off to getting the capability to be able to measure that. Again, it has been documented in some literature that the US has a satellite that can read license plates from space. Hey, that's what we are talking about. So Nigeria does not have that. The second thing is data democracy. The second limit is data democracy. Because you find out that because they are not able to provide this, they don't have the capability to get these satellites out, they don't have real-time data is not being shared by the international community to mitigate this terrorism there. As a matter of fact, Egypt and one other countries, they put out a proposal to NATO about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm sorry, to United Nations, about 3 or 4 years ago, for it to be discussed, for them to begin to share data, but it was turned down. It was turned down. So now the final limitation to Nigeria's development effort is the fact that they do not have satellite development facility, and they do not have satellite launching system by themselves, which means even all the satellites that were created, they were either created in UK, Ukraine, Russia, and China, and they were launched into orbit through their rockets. Now, in addition to this limitation of space capability limitation, I wanted to call out another limitation just for the sake of people that want to discuss the outside. And the limitation I wanted to discuss here is the decision-making process of Nigerian leaders towards attacking this. And I want to go ahead and look at, this is just a picture that shows the capability of African country, of the world in terms of satellite. The limitation that I want to call out is the decision-making process. And I wanted to look at the decision-making process from the lens of a theory called cybernetic theory of decision-making. Cybernetic theory of decision-making, which was postulated by Herbert Simon in 1985, borders on simply two concepts: the concept of bounded rationality and cognitive limits. Bounded rationality describes how humans make decisions. Human rationality is limited into three factors, is limited by three factors. Our thinking capacity is limited. Information that is available to us is limited. Time is limited. Now, take all this limitation and put it in an environment of a leader that is governing over a dysfunctional system. I really hate to use that word, but right now, Africa is seriously a dysfunctional system. Nigeria specifically is multi-ethnic, is multicultural, is multi-religious. So you find out that political decision in that environment is highly bureaucratic. And because it is highly bureaucratic, there's so much competition there. There's so much contention in terms of decisions. So optimum decisions are not coming out. So in terms of mitigating terrorism, for instance, you find out that it depends on the political groups. You have two political groups. One, some of them that are sympathetic to the cause of the terrorists, and others that are victims. Now forget the third part. Some actors are there just weaponizing and monetizing the crisis. So that I just want to put this out there so that people that wants to relate that, because I've heard a lot of things from a lot of reports about people outside and say, no, Nigerian leaders are this, Nigerian leaders are that, and like it's only fair just to put it out there like that, to make sure that this is what they're dealing with. It happens all over the world too. There's bureaucratic decision-making process in the US, but at least the US has a system. The US has a system that allows to minimize all these challenges. Now, in terms of discussion, we've talked about it again, that the violence in Nigeria continues to increase, both in frequency, lethality, and spread. And it could get worse because by next year, February, the country is going to have a transfer of power. And there's been a lot of challenge right now because they believe that the current president is of a Fulani ethnic group that is the one that is spoon-feeding the whole process. But that's not my objective. My objective to say, okay, is that how can we bring additional technology? And again, I'm about to lean very, very heavily on the red team concept that just came from David, that, hey, we could look at this and see how do we evaluate the environment. In addition to all this, we see, I want to make one or two recommendations. Even though we have talked about the limitation, we have talked about data that could be shared and things like that, there are other sub-2 technologies that could be co-opted. And one of them that I wanted to call out is adapting animal tracking technology. This has been in the world. It's already used in wildlife. They track animal from cradle to grave. They track them. So why can't we use the same thing? Because these terrorists right now, they're currently living in the forest. They're living in the jungles of Nigeria. And there are animals that are domiciled in those forests. So why can't we begin to implant those animals with valuable sensor devices? From those sensor devices, we can get voice, we can get location. And I'm gonna get a little while, this is what I mean. This is the kind of picture that we're talking about. All these animals, most of them are already domiciled in those environments. If we can take the willpower and the organization to begin to put sensors on these animals, at least it's a step in the right direction. And all those sensors will now be captured using GPS. So I feel that that's a good thing that can really help. In conclusion, we know that, again, terrorism is a big threat, not only to Nigeria. Nigeria might be experiencing it now. Africa might be experiencing it now. It's a moving target. It's a fluid thing. The barrier that happened a couple of days ago for the Queen, the biggest threat they were afraid of was terrorism, because it's easy to just blow 20 people up and that will spoil the whole arrangement there. And so unless Africa, that is the weak link right now, is focused on, it's going to be a bigger problem. But unfortunately, Africa has its own problem. And so I talked about data sharing, intelligence. Then I talked about the political decision making that I mentioned before. Unfortunately, right now, most of the institutions in Nigeria, they are rent seeking. And the whole environment is riddled with pervasive corruption. And all those things has to be taken into consideration. And you mentioned that before when you were discussing, all those things have to be taken into consideration when this help has to come. I'm not advocating that foreign world should stop giving Nigerians, giving Africans loans. They don't need loans. They need solutions. Because in an environment that is rent-seeking, in an environment that is pervaded with corruption, you take $1 billion there, it's going to disappear into wild wind. But you provide solutions because you have to look at it that we're helping ourselves by helping them. And so that's the final thing there, that say bilateral and multilateral cooperation is extremely critical, very, very critical to mitigating terrorism. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Samson. You can go ahead and finish showing your, showing your slide deck. All right, so if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and put those, again, either into the chat or into the Q&A section. I'm gonna go ahead and open it up for the very first question here. This is from Chris Marriott, and it is aimed to David, I believe. Considering Taiwan and the South China Sea are the most likely triggers for future great power conflict, has there been any thought to inviting other treaty allies from the Indo-Pacific region, specifically Philippines and Thailand, to participate in future Red Team war games?
I will go ahead and answer that on the live instead of typing an answer. That is a very good question. We have talked about including other allies from the Indo-Pacific region. As you mentioned, as I had my slides there, we already are working closely with Australia and with Japan, with whom we have defense agreements, actually. I cannot say in this forum which other countries that we are considering. I can't confirm or deny the ones you're talking about, because it's not necessarily because it's so classified or anything like that, but we want to make sure that we're not outing these people, and if there's agreements in process or bringing them in, we want to make sure that those are solidified before we actually say anything about it publicly. But yes, we are inviting other Indo-Pacific regional allies into these games, and we hope very soon to be able to integrate them into what we're doing. And that would, that is very necessary. You're absolutely right. The China conflict is the China problem is only going to get worse as time goes by, and we need all the help we can get. So yeah, and those allies also are deeply concerned, and that's one of the reasons why they're very interested in getting into the war games. So thank you for that question.
Next one is actually a question from me, and that is, on your earlier slide, are you a fan of Dr. Strangelove?
How did you guess? Yeah, I think that and The Hunt for Red October are the two required movies that all the people that back in my office would have to watch. So,
I actually have a two-part question here. First would be, how would you choose which countries are involved in the Fusion Center? And then secondly, should the Fusion Center be a military-led body or a civilian-led body?
You think the question is, which country should be involved? We all, obviously countries with whom we have close working relationships. We've got the Five Eyes partners, and we have Japan, we have Australia. I think that countries, there's a lot of mechanics and dynamics that go into bringing a country in. We cannot just invite somebody to come aboard. It depends on the level of sharing relationships we got, because there's classification issues. These war games are classified. So we have to be able to establish that kind of a sharing relationship with them first. So the countries, I think if it were my call to do that, I would certainly bring in as many of the NATO allies as I could. We noticed where there's like 6 of them in there right now. But I would also, in keeping with the earlier question, make sure that we bring in allies from the Indo-Pacific, and they really need to bring to the table some kind of a space capability or a space threat to their capabilities. And they have to have skin in the space game, basically. You want people and countries that are able to not only bring the cultural and all that stuff to the table, but they got to have some kind of military and national security spaces expertise to bring in as well. They got to have a stake in that game. The second part about civilian versus military, none of our red teams have ever been led by the military except for one. We had one of our allies, actually, a military officer led that. It really doesn't matter so much to me if it's military or civilian leading the fusion cell, because ultimately the civilian leadership and the military leadership are the ones that are served. So as long as the person is someone who is a senior expert and has the gravitas, as we say, to lead in a coalition context, a cell of space and foreign adversary experts, I don't think it matters so much.
I have a question then for Samson. Do you believe that SpaceX and other commercial satellite companies are opening the door toward your idea?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, SpaceX and most of the satellite companies, first of all, they are commercial. They're profit driven. Now, and I don't want to belittle them. I don't want to do anything, but I believe that he who pays, they will service. I just hope at some point, people doesn't start reaching out to them, or terrorist organization doesn't start reaching out to them and things like that. But like I said, they are company, they are commercial. If the opportunity comes, I'm not sure that they would like to get involved. Some of them do have the data. That was the question that I posed to one of the presenters earlier when I presented to Dr. Gary, for instance, that, okay, we have 3,000 satellites. They are low satellites, they're very low satellites, maybe 300, 500 miles or kilometers and things like that. But the idea is that, can he still do surveillance? And he said, oh no, that's the realm of the military. Right there, that's my answer. So because they want to separate themselves from commercial and from military. And the interesting thing is that it depends. If the market is big enough, like they go other places, for instance. Now, let's take, for instance, in terms of space, if China begins to get involved into commercialization of space traveling, for instance, right now, their primary objective is not profit. We all know that. The primary objective, all the companies they are buying in the US, they are willing to pay more. Their primary objective is intelligence. So if they are able to, if they introduce commercialization, for instance, right now, God knows what's going to happen. And that's one of my concerns about the limitation that Nigeria is suffering, for instance. If Nigeria cannot design its own, Africa cannot design its own, then it doesn't matter what information you gather. Whoever launches it to the orbit, whoever designed the rocket for you, designed the satellite for you, they can put a backdoor on your rocket. They get all the information. You get the residue, even though you pay. so that's my biggest challenge. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep. I'm actually going to join a question or two of mine with a question from Jonathan here. He mentions, does Africa currently have any possible launch facilities that Nigeria could make use of instead of outsourcing? In addition, one of my follow-up questions was, would you recommend that there should be a multinational approach to bringing satellite construction and launching services to the African continent? And then yet another sub-question of, do you believe that there is an appetite for that type of multinational approach, or do you believe that there are too many political differences for it to be able to make, to become a possibility or become reality?
Again, thank you. I think that's a very, very quick, that's a very, very excellent question. The last part of my slide, I ended that slide with bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Without a cooperation, no country can do anything by themselves. Now, Africa has a program. As a matter of fact, I was reading something recently. Africa has tried to create what is called an African Space Agency right now, where they are trying to collaborate. Kenya, for instance, the only country right now, and it's not there yet, the only country that is really struggling to have a facility, not a launching facility now because there's no rockets. It's a facility where they can actually put together. I don't want to use the word assembly because that's a different grade, because you can assemble before you start designing the parts themselves. But the only country that is close to assembly is South Africa. It's South Africa right now. And to your point, yes, in theory, there's an appetite to come together. In theory, there's an appetite to come together. And Africa right now has a program, 2063, the Africa we want. That's a plan. That's about 40, 50 years from now. That's the plan. They want everything to be, they want to have uniform transportation system, defense system, and things like that. But there's so much disparity among them right now. There's a lot of problem internationally. Virtually, I would say 60% to 70% of African countries right now, they have internal turmoil. They have internal trouble going on. Either there's a coup, as a matter of, on the West African side, about 6 countries has experienced coup. 3 of the countries has been kicked out of ECOWAS because they have been replaced, the Democrats have been replaced by military. And all over the place, Kenya, if you go to Kenya, they just did an election. They had to go to court 3 times before they get it done. Mogadishu is still having a lot of war. United Nations is dealing with that. So there's a lot of internal strifes within the whole continent by itself. But the biggest concern for me is that there's a lot of external actors. There's a lot of external actors that are benefiting from this. And they are the ones that are driving it. Right now, I would say take Nigeria, for instance, right now, for the past 6 months, it has been cataloged that there's over 6 million AK-47 weapons there. Nigeria does not manufacture AK-47. Somebody is providing that. Somebody is supplying it. So somebody is benefiting from the chaos. So it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for Africa, especially, for them to be able to fight back and at the same time look at themselves to be able to become cohesive. At the same time, there's the fight of those leaders. I mean, the survivor of the political leaders. If your tenure is just 4 years, you want to survive. And so you want to do everything. So it's a lot complicated there. The challenge is that the whole system is dysfunctional and it becomes a bigger problem. But to answer your question, yes, there's an appetite for collaboration. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it answers my question. And I'm just looking here. Anybody else have additional questions? Because otherwise, I think we have actually succeeded in doing something that does not happen very often in this conference, which is finishing with a few minutes left at the end. All right. Well, thank you everybody for participating and attending in the conference, as well as in our particular section of the conference. If you guys need to get any information, Samson has provided his email address. Mr. Swafford has provided his in his PowerPoint. If anybody would like a copy of either their paper or slide decks, you can always reach out to me and I will go ahead and get those pieces of information to you. I want to thank both David and Samson for their great presentations. And I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Cooper. Thank you, Samson. Y'all have a good night.